The air inside Red's tavern was thick with the smell of stale beer, fried onions, and decades of bad decisions. It was the kind of establishment that existed in every small town across America, a place where the neon beer signs buzzed with a persistent electrical hum, where the wooden bar top was etched with countless initials and forgotten promises, and where the regulars treated their bar stools like inherited thrones. Friday nights at Red's were predictable. The same faces, the same drinks, the same conversations circling the drain of memory and regret. The jukebox in the corner played a rotation of country classics and 80s rock, its speakers crackling on the high notes. The pool table near the back was perpetually occupied by the same three guys who'd been playing the same game for what seemed like 20 years. But tonight, the predictable was about to shatter. "You gonna move, or do I need to make you?" The voice carried across the bar like a thunderclap, silencing conversations mid-sentence. It belonged to Tyler Brennan, and when Tyler spoke, people paid attention, not out of respect, but out of a survival instinct honed through years of witnessing his volatility. Tyler was 23 but carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. He stood about 6 feet tall with an athletic build that came from obsessive hours at the gym and a genetics he'd done nothing to earn but everything to exploit. His hair was styled in that deliberately messy way that took more product and effort than most people's entire grooming routine. He wore his high school varsity jacket, red with white leather sleeves, the letter H emblazoned on the chest, like a military decoration, despite the fact that he'd graduated 5 years ago. The jacket was his identity, his armor, his constant reminder to everyone, and especially to himself, that he had once been somebody. That he had once mattered. His face was young but already showing signs of the man he was becoming, a slight puffiness around the eyes from too many late nights and too much cheap beer, a permanent sneer that he'd cultivated as part of his image, and a jawline that he kept flexed constantly, as if life were one long photo shoot and everyone was watching. Tyler had peaked at 18. Captain of the football team, prom king, the guy whose name appeared in the local paper every week during season. Recruiters had come to his games. College scouts had filled his mailbox with letters. His parents had thrown a party when he signed with State, convinced their son was destined for greatness. Then came freshman year. The realization that being a big fish in a small pond meant nothing when the ocean was full of sharks. He'd been benched by week 3, cut from the team by Thanksgiving, and back home by Christmas with his tail between his legs and a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. That was 4 years ago. Since then, he'd worked a series of dead-end jobs, currently assistant manager at his uncle's sporting goods store, and spent his nights at Red's, reliving his glory days with anyone who'd listen and punishing anyone who wouldn't. The target of his attention tonight sat alone in a corner booth near the emergency exit. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore faded jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and work boots that had seen better days. Everything about her screamed invisibility, the kind of person designed to slip through crowds unnoticed, to exist in the margins of other people's stories. Her name was Chen, though almost no one in town knew that. She'd arrived 6 weeks earlier, taken a room at the Riverside Inn, and started working the early morning shift at the Sunrise Diner on Route 9. She was polite but distant, efficient but cold. She didn't make small talk. She didn't gossip. She existed in her own carefully maintained bubble of solitude. And that, more than anything, made her a problem for Tyler Brennan. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're new to this channel, you're about to witness something extraordinary, a story about the dangerous assumption that silence equals weakness. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we specialize in stories about real power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that waits patiently in the shadows until the moment demands it reveals itself. These are stories about the quiet ones, the underestimated ones, and the explosive reckoning that comes when ignorance meets consequence. Tyler had been building toward this confrontation all evening. It had started innocuously enough, whispered comments to his crew, consisting of Jake and Connor, 2 guys who'd been riding his coattails since middle school. They laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, agreed with his opinions even when they were wrong, and ate him up in his casual cruelty because it was easier than standing against him. The comments had started as observations: "Who's the new girl? Never seen her here before. Probably another one of those drifters, taking jobs from people who actually belong here." Then the observations had evolved into complaints: "Heard she got the waitress job at Sunrise. My cousin applied for that. These people come into our town, don't even try to fit in. Someone should let her know she's not welcome." And now, fueled by 6 beers and a lifetime of unchecked entitlement, the complaints had become a confrontation. Maya didn't look up when Tyler addressed her. She simply continued tracing the rim of her water glass with one finger, her attention focused entirely on the small, methodical circles she was making through the condensation. Her face showed no emotion, no fear, no anger, no acknowledgement whatsoever of his presence. And that indifference was gasoline on the fire of Tyler's ego. The bar had gone silent. The pool game stopped mid-break. The jukebox seemed to sense the tension, the final notes of "Sweet Home Alabama" fading into an oppressive quiet. Every eye in Red's Tavern turned toward the corner booth, waiting to see how this would play out. Red himself, the 72-year-old owner who'd run this bar for 40 years and had seen his share of trouble, straightened behind the counter. His hand moved toward the phone, but he hesitated. Tyler's father was on the town council. His uncle owned half the commercial real estate on Main Street. The Brennan family had roots in this town that went back generations, and those roots had grown thorns. Tyler took a step closer to Maya's booth, his varsity jacket catching the overhead light. He was flanked by Jake and Connor, who wore matching smirks of anticipation. This was their entertainment, their Friday night show, and they had front-row seats. "I know you can hear me," Tyler said, his voice rising. He placed his hands on the table, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "You think you can just come into our town, take our jobs, sit in our bar, and act like you're too good to acknowledge me?" Up close, Tyler's face showed the flush of alcohol and adrenaline. His eyes were slightly unfocused, pupils dilated. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool temperature. His breath, when it reached Maya across the table, carried the sweet-sour smell of beer and the faint chemical tang of energy drinks. Maya finally raised her head. The movement was slow, deliberate, controlled. Her neck straightened vertebra by vertebra, her chin lifting, her eyes traveling up from the water glass to meet his gaze. When their eyes finally locked, Tyler felt something he didn't have the emotional vocabulary to identify. It wasn't fear. He knew fear, he'd seen it countless times in the faces of people he'd intimidated, bullied, or threatened. Edition fear was wide eyes and trembling lips and stammered apologies. This wasn't that. Maya's eyes were dark brown, almost black in the dim tavern light. They didn't widen with alarm. They didn't narrow with anger. They simply observed him with the cool, clinical detachment of a scientist examining an insect under a microscope. There was no emotion in that gaze, no judgment, no reaction at all, just a calm, steady assessment that somehow made Tyler feel like he was being catalogued, categorized, and filed away as irrelevant. "I heard you," Maya said. Her voice was quiet but crystalline clear, each word perfectly articulated without any tremor or uncertainty. It was the voice of someone stating simple facts, as emotionless as reading a weather report. The lack of fear in her tone threw Tyler off his rhythm. He was used to people backing down, apologizing, scrambling to defuse the situation. Her calm was somehow more provocative than any insult could have been. "Oh, you heard me?" Tyler's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You heard me, but you decided to ignore me? You think you're special? Think you're better than everyone here?" He laughed, but it came out forced and hollow. "Let me tell you something, sweetheart." "Don't call me that," Maya interrupted. Her tone hadn't changed, still quiet, still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that made the air in the bar feel suddenly heavier. Tyler's face flushed a deeper red. Being interrupted was bad enough, but being interrupted by her, in front of everyone, was an intolerable slight to his authority. "What did you just say to me?" "I said don't call me that." Maya's eyes never left his. "You've had too much to drink. You're looking for a fight you don't want. I'm asking you politely, walk away." The bar seemed to hold its collective breath. No one had spoken to Tyler Brennan like that in years. The last person who'd tried, some college kid passing through 2 summers ago, had ended up with a broken nose and his car keyed in 3 different locations. Tyler had connections. Tyler had protection. Tyler had the weight of his family name behind him. But Maya didn't seem to know about any of that. Or maybe she just didn't care. Behind the bar, Red's hand had closed around the phone. He'd already decided he was calling this in before it got worse. But his fingers hesitated over the buttons. Part of him, a part he wasn't proud of, wanted to see what would happen next. Jake and Connor had stopped smirking. Something about the woman's complete lack of fear had unsettled them, triggered some primal instinct that sensed danger even when it came in a small, unassuming package. Tyler's brain, clouded with alcohol and ego, interpreted Maya's calmness as disrespect of the highest order. In his world, in his town, people showed him deference. They acknowledged his status. They backed down when he pushed. She had done none of those things. "Walk away." Tyler's voice rose to a near shout. "This is my bar. This is my town. You don't tell me what to do. You get up, you walk out that door, and you don't come back. That's what's going to happen here." "No," Maya said simply. That single word, that simple, quiet refusal, was the match that lit the fuse. Tyler's hand shot out across the table, his fingers closing around Maya's wrist. His grip was hard, meant to hurt, meant to intimidate. He'd used this move 100 times before, the physical assertion of dominance, the reminder of who was stronger, who was in control. "I think," Tyler said through clenched teeth, "you and I need to step outside and have a conversation about respect and knowing your place." He started to pull, expecting her to stumble out of the booth, off balance and frightened. He was already imagining the satisfaction of watching her scramble, hearing her apologize, seeing the fear finally break through that infuriating calm. What happened next took less than 3 seconds but would be replayed, dissected, and mythologized for years to come. Maya's free hand moved with a speed that seemed to violate the laws of physics. One moment it was resting on the table, relaxed and open. The next moment it had closed around Tyler's thumb, specifically, around the metacarpophalangeal joint, the vulnerable hinge where thumb met hand. She didn't just grab it. She trapped it, her fingers wrapping around in a specific configuration that martial artists call a gooseneck lock. Then, using Tyler's own pulling momentum against him, she applied pressure in a direction that human thumbs were never designed to bend. The small joint separated with a pop that sounded like someone snapping their fingers, but louder, wetter, more wrong. Tyler's scream was instantaneous and involuntary, a high-pitched shriek that seemed impossible from a man his size. The pain was beyond anything he'd experienced, a white-hot spike of agony that shot from his thumb through his entire arm and exploded in his brain like a flashbang grenade. But Maya wasn't finished. In the same fluid motion, she rose from the booth. Tyler, his brain overwhelmed by pain and shock, didn't even register her movement until it was too late. She had stepped into his space, her right leg hooking behind his, her left hand coming up to his chest, and suddenly Tyler was airborne. The throw, a basic judo technique called ogashi, or major hip throw, used Tyler's own forward momentum and body weight against him. Maya's hip became the fulcrum, Tyler's body the lever, and gravity did the rest. Time seemed to slow down. Tyler's eyes went wide with shock and incomprehension as his feet left the ground. He saw the ceiling tiles pass by his vision. He heard Connor yell something. He felt the momentary weightlessness of freefall. Then he hit the floor. The impact drove every molecule of air from his lungs with a sound like a bellows being crushed. His head bounced once of the wooden planks, not hard enough to crack his skull but hard enough to fill his vision with sparking stars and make his ears ring with a high, persistent tone. His back felt like it had been struck with a sledgehammer. The dislocated thumb sent continuous waves of nauseating pain through his nervous system. He gasped for air but his lungs wouldn't work, locked in that terrible moment of paralysis that comes from having the wind knocked out of you. Maya stood over him. She wasn't breathing hard. Her ponytail hadn't come loose. She looked exactly as calm and composed as she had sitting in the booth, as if throwing a fully grown man through the air required no more effort than standing up. "Stay down," she said quietly. The bar remained frozen in shocked silence. Red's hand had stopped halfway to the phone. Jake's mouth hung open. Connor had actually taken a step backward, his body instinctively recognizing a threat his mind hadn't yet processed. Tyler lay on the floor, his chest heaving as his lungs slowly remembered how to work. The pain in his thumb was excruciating, but worse was the psychological shock, the sudden, violent reversal of everything he thought he understood about power, control, and his place in the world. For the first time in his adult life, Tyler Brennan felt helpless. And helplessness, for someone like Tyler, was intolerable. His brain, still fogged with alcohol and now swimming in adrenaline, made a catastrophically bad decision. Instead of staying down, instead of accepting the lesson being taught, Tyler decided to double down on his aggression. With a roar that was equal parts pain and humiliated rage, Tyler surged to his feet. His right hand was useless, the thumb jutting at a grotesque angle, but he still had his left arm. He still had his size. He still had the muscle memory of countless hours in the gym and years of football training. He charged. It was a bull rush, head down, left arm outstretched to grab, to tackle, to overpower through sheer mass and momentum. It was the same move that had won him games in high school, the same move that had won him fights in parking lots, the same move that had always worked. Until now. Maya sidestepped. The movement was minimal, economical, just enough distance to let Tyler's grasping hand find nothing but air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance and stumbling, and in that fraction of a second when he was fully committed, fully vulnerable, Maya struck. Her right leg snapped upward in a front kick, made Jerry in Japanese, though no one in Red's Tavern would know the terminology. The heel of her work boot, worn smooth from miles of walking but still solid, connected with the side of Tyler's left knee. The human knee is a marvel of engineering but also of vulnerability. It's designed to bend in one direction only, held together by ligaments with exotic names, the anterior cruciate ligament, the medial collateral ligament, the posterior cruciate ligament. These bands of tissue are strong when the knee moves as designed, but catastrophically weak when forced to move in ways anatomy never intended. Maya's kick struck at the precise angle to overcome all of those structural advantages. The sound was worse than Tyler's earlier scream. It was a wet, organic snap, the sound of ligaments tearing like overstressed rubber bands, of cartilage crushing, of a joint bending in a direction that violated every principle of orthopedic architecture. Tyler's second scream was different from his first. The first had been shock and pain. This was pure agony mixed with terror, the primal sound of a body recognizing catastrophic damage. His leg buckled inward at an impossible angle. He went down hard, his hands instinctively reaching for his knee, his face a mask of suffering. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Snot ran from his nose. He made sounds that were barely human, keening, desperate, the noise of someone whose entire reality had just been violently reconstructed. Maya stood over him, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady. She looked down at Tyler with those same calm, assessing eyes. "I warned you," she said softly. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Her gait was unhurried, her steps measured and even. She passed Jake and Connor, who had pressed themselves against the wall like they were trying to phase through it. She passed Red, who stood behind the bar with the phone finally pressed to his ear, his voice shaking as he requested an ambulance. She passed the other patrons, who parted before her like the Red Sea, their faces showing a mixture of shock, awe, and fear. She pushed open the door, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of rain and wet asphalt and the promise of freedom. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click. The entire confrontation, from the moment Tyler had grabbed her wrist to the moment he lay broken and crying on the floor, had lasted 37 seconds. 37 seconds that would be remembered, discussed, and transformed into legend. 37 seconds that proved that assumptions could be fatal, that appearances could be deceiving, and that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. The silence that followed Maya's exit was profound and complete, broken only by Tyler's whimpering and the distant sound of sirens growing steadily closer. Red stood behind the bar, the phone still pressed to his ear, giving the dispatcher information in a shaky voice. Yes, Red's Tavern on Highway 22. Severe injuries. Leg, looks like a dislocation or break. And his hand, his thumb. He needs an ambulance. Fast. Jake and Connor remained frozen against the wall, their faces pale. They were looking at Tyler as if seeing him for the first time, not as the invincible force they'd hidden behind, but as a broken, crying man who'd catastrophically misjudged his opponent. Other patrons began to move, slowly at first, then with more purpose. Someone brought a bar towel and tried to make Tyler comfortable, though his screams of pain when they touched his leg made them quickly back away. Someone else offered water, which Tyler couldn't drink because he was hyperventilating, his chest heaving with sobs. The ambulance arrived 11 minutes later, followed closely by Sheriff's Deputy Morrison, a tired-looking man in his 50s who'd been hoping for a quiet Friday night. The paramedics worked with efficient calm. They stabilized Tyler's neck first, standard protocol for anyone who'd been thrown, then carefully examined his injuries. Their professional expressions tightened as they assessed the damage. "Jesus," one of them muttered. "His knee is destroyed. MCL, ACL, probably meniscus too. And this thumb." He carefully prodded the joint, causing Tyler to scream again. "Full dislocation. We need to transport immediately." They loaded Tyler onto a gurney, strapping him down carefully. His varsity jacket had come partially off during the fall, and it lay crumpled on the floor near a puddle of spilled beer, the white leather sleeve stained and dirty. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, Tyler's eyes were open but unfocused. The pain medication they'd administered was starting to take effect, wrapping his consciousness in cotton wool, but underneath the pharmaceutical haze, his brain was beginning the terrible work of processing what had happened. He replayed those 37 seconds on an endless loop. The feel of his thumb bending wrong. The sensation of being airborne, helpless. The crushing impact of hitting the floor. The nauseating snap of his knee. And most of all, those eyes, those calm, dark, completely unaffected eyes that had looked at him not with anger or triumph, but with the clinical detachment of someone removing an obstacle. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor's assessment was clinical and devastating: complete tear of the ACL, MCL, and medial meniscus. "We're looking at immediate surgery, 8 to 12 months of rehabilitation, and honestly, even with the best care, he'll never have full function of that knee again. The thumb dislocation is actually the easier fix, relatively speaking." Tyler's parents arrived within the hour, his mother pale and shaking, his father grim-faced and demanding answers. But what answers could anyone give? Their son had picked a fight with the wrong person, and he'd lost. Badly. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Tyler spent the night in a hospital bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, his dreams filled with the sound of tearing ligaments and the image of dark, impassive eyes. By Saturday afternoon, the story had spread through town like wildfire. The details varied wildly depending on who was telling it. By the time it reached the hair salon on Main Street, Maya had fought off 6 men and walked away without a scratch. By the time it circulated through the high school group chat, she was a former Navy SEAL who'd killed people with her bare hands. By the time it reached the church ladies' prayer circle, she was either an angel sent to teach Tyler a lesson or a demon sent to destroy the town's youth. But the core truth remained constant: Tyler Brennan, the town's golden boy, the untouchable prince who'd ruled through intimidation and family connections, had been utterly, completely, devastatingly defeated by a woman half his size who hadn't even broken a sweat. The story did more than spread, it evolved. It became a Rorschach test for the town's conscience. Some people cheered, thrilled to see a bully finally get what he deserved. Others were horrified, convinced that Maya was dangerous and should be arrested. Still others tried to find middle ground, arguing that both sides were wrong, that violence was never the answer, conveniently ignoring that Maya had only responded to violence initiated by Tyler. The gossip reached into every corner of life in town. At the Sunrise Diner where Maya worked, business suddenly doubled. People came not just for breakfast but for the chance to glimpse the legendary woman who'd taken down Tyler Brennan. Maya's co-workers suddenly found themselves bombarded with questions. What was she like? Did she seem violent? Had she ever mentioned military training? But Maya herself remained an enigma. She came to work, served coffee and eggs with the same quiet efficiency, and left when her shift ended. She didn't discuss what happened. When customers tried to ask, she would simply say, "I don't want to talk about it," and move on to the next table. At the sporting goods store where Tyler had worked, his uncle quietly began looking for a replacement. The conversation was awkward, uncomfortable, tinged with family obligation and economic reality. Tyler would be out for months, maybe longer. The store needed someone behind the counter. Jake and Connor, Tyler's constant companions, suddenly found themselves without their leader. Without Tyler's gravitational pull, they drifted apart, each dealing with the trauma of that night in their own way. Jake started seeing a therapist, working through years of vicarious bullying and complicity. Connor moved Ed 2 towns over, unable to face the daily reminders of what he'd witnessed. Red's Tavern saw its business drop by 40%. People stayed away, spooked by the violence or uncomfortable with the reminder that their Friday night refuge had been the scene of someone's destruction. Red didn't blame them. Some nights, when he was alone closing up, he'd look at the spot where Tyler had fallen and could swear he still saw the outline of his body on the floorboards. Tyler's recovery was slow, painful, and marked by a series of grim milestones. Week 1, surgery to repair his knee. The orthopedic surgeon did his best, but even he admitted that Tyler would never regain full function. "You're young," the doctor said, trying to find something positive to say. "Your body will adapt. But competitive athletics? That's over." Week 2, physical therapy began. Tyler cried during the first session, not from pain, though there was plenty of that, but from the humiliation of needing help to walk, of having to relearn basic movements his body had forgotten. Week 4, his thumb had healed enough to remove the splint. The joint worked, technically, but it was weak and ached constantly. Simple tasks like opening jars or gripping a steering wheel left him frustrated and exhausted. Week 8, Tyler tried to return to work. He lasted 3 hours before the pain and fatigue forced him to go home. His uncle was understanding but concerned. The sporting goods store couldn't run on sympathy. Month 3, Tyler looked at his reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. He'd lost weight, his muscles atrophying from inactivity. His face was drawn, aged by pain and prescription painkillers. His eyes, once confident and commanding, now carried a haunted quality. Month 5, the nightmares were the worst. Tyler would dream of the tavern, of Maya's eyes, of the moment his knee bent the wrong way. He'd wake up gasping, his sheets soaked with sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. Sleep became something to fear rather than a refuge. Month 7, Tyler's parents suggested therapy. He refused at first. Therapy was for people with real problems, not for guys like him. But after another sleepless night and another day where he couldn't concentrate long enough to do his job, he finally agreed. The therapist was a middle-aged woman named Dr. Stevens who had a calm demeanor and a way of asking questions that cut through his defenses. "Tell me what you've learned," she said during their 5th session. Tyler had been expecting a different question. He'd been preparing to talk about the physical recovery, about the pain management, about the slow process of rebuilding his life. "What do you mean?" he asked. "From what happened? What have you learned?" Tyler sat silently for a long moment. The question was simple, but the answer was complex, layered with shame and reluctant self-awareness. "I learned," he finally said, his voice quiet, "that I was a bully. I learned that I used my size and my family's name to push people around because it made me feel important. I learned that I peaked in high school and spent the last 5 years trying to relive that feeling by making other people small." Dr. Stevens nodded encouragingly. "I learned," Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger, "that I didn't know anything about real strength. I thought strength was about being loud, being intimidating, being feared. But that woman, Maya, she showed me what real strength looks like. It's quiet. It's controlled. It doesn't need to prove itself until it's absolutely necessary." "And?" Dr. Stevens prompted. "And I learned that I never want to be that person again. The person I was at the tavern, the person I'd been for years. That person was a coward who hurt people to feel powerful. I don't want to be him anymore." It was the first honest thing Tyler had said in months, maybe years. And saying it aloud, admitting it to another person and to himself, felt like lancing a wound that had been festering. Maya stayed in town for exactly 3 more weeks after the incident at Red's Tavern. She went to work each morning, served her customers with the same quiet efficiency, and returned to her room at the riverside in each evening. She didn't give interviews. She didn't explain herself. She existed in her bubble of solitude, unchanged by the chaos swirling around her. But internally, the weight of what had happened pressed down on her like a physical thing. Maya had left her old life behind for a reason. 8 years in the Marine Corps, 2 combat deployments, more violence and death than anyone should have to process. She'd seen friends die. She'd taken lives in the line of duty. She'd come home with medals she kept in a box under her bed and memories that played on repeat every time she closed her eyes. She'd moved to this small town looking for peace, for quiet, for a chance to rebuild something resembling a normal life. She'd wanted to be anonymous, invisible, just another face in the background. Instead, she'd become famous. Notorious. The mysterious warrior woman who'd defeated the town bully in 37 seconds. People stared at her everywhere she went. Some with admiration, some with fear, some with curiosity. But all of them saw her as something other than human, a legend, a myth, a character in a story rather than a person trying to live her life. On a cold Tuesday morning in early November, Maya packed her belongings into the same worn duffel bag she'd arrived with. She cleaned her room at the Riverside Inn with the same meticulous attention to detail she applied to everything, leaving no trace of her occupancy except for a thank you note for the owner and 2 months' rent she didn't owe. She left before dawn, before the early shift at the Sunrise Diner, before anyone could see her go. Her car, a beat-up Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on the odometer, pulled out of the parking lot and onto the highway, its taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. She didn't leave a forwarding address. Didn't say goodbye. She simply moved on, carrying her past with her like luggage, looking for another small town, another quiet corner, another chance at invisibility. Behind her, the town slowly returned to its normal rhythms. The story of what happened at Red's Tavern became part of the local folklore, told and retold, each iteration adding new embellishments and removing inconvenient truths until it bore only a passing resemblance to reality. But the lesson remained, etched into the collective consciousness like words carved in stone. Silence is not Weakness. Stillness is not surrender. And the quietest person in the room might be the one you should never, ever underestimate. Tyler Brennan stood in front of the sporting goods store, keys in hand, preparing to lock up for the night. His limp was barely noticeable now unless you knew to look for it. His knee would never be what it was, but he'd learned to adapt, to compensate, to live with the constant reminder of his mistakes. He'd taken over management of the store when his uncle retired. He was good at it, surprisingly. Patient with customers, especially the young athletes who came in starry-eyed and dreaming of greatness. He had a gift for tempering their ambitions with reality while encouraging their passion. He'd apologized to Jake, to Connor, to every person he could remember bullying or intimidating. Some accepted the apology. Some didn't. He understood both reactions and didn't push. He'd gone back to Red's tavern exactly once, 6 months after the incident. Red had been kind but cautious, watching him carefully as he ordered a water. He'd stopped drinking entirely, and sat at the bar. "I'm sorry," Tyler had said to Red. "For everything. For the years of being an asshole here, for that night, for all of it." Red had studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Water's on the house," he'd said. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a start. Now, a year later, Tyler locked the store and walked to his car, his breath visible in the cold air. He drove home slowly, carefully, always aware of the fragility of everything, of bodies, of reputations, of the careful peace he'd built from the ruins of his old life. In his apartment, he opened his laptop and did what he'd done every few months since that night. He searched for Chen. He never found her. She'd vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. No social media presence, no forwarding address, no trail to follow. Part of him was relieved. Part of him was disappointed. He'd wanted to thank her, in some strange way. To acknowledge that she'd destroyed his life in order to save it, that she'd broken his body to fix his soul. But maybe that was the point. Maybe some lessons didn't come with closure or resolution. Maybe some teachers delivered their message and moved on, leaving you to figure out what it meant. Tyler closed the laptop and stood at his window, looking out at the small town that had watched him rise and fall and slowly, painfully rebuild. He thought about the person he'd been, arrogant, cruel, secure in his unearned privilege. He thought about the person he was now, humble, aware, grateful for second chances. And he thought about Maya, wherever she was, carrying her own burdens, looking for her own peace, leaving behind a trail of changed lives and hard-learned lessons. "Thank you," he whispered to the empty room. The words disappeared into the silence, unanswered but necessary. And life, as it always does, continued forward. So tell us, what part of the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on this story. Have you ever encountered someone who taught you a lesson about underestimating the quiet ones? Share your experiences with us. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We bring you stories like this every week, stories about justice, consequence, and the dangerous assumptions we make about strength and power. Real strength doesn't need to shout. It speaks in whispers and strikes like lightning. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.